I'm Diana Nicholette Jeon, and I'm here for 112 Publications today. And this is our first video interview with anyone, and I have Eric Kunsman with me. He's a photographer based out of Rochester, New York. I first met him when we were at Mary Virginia Swanson's workshop together a year ago, January. And then we were again put together at Photolucida the same year. And we became friends. We've been in several seminars together since then. We seem to keep traveling in the same circle. Given all the political stuff that's going on right now, I wanted to specifically invite Eric to talk about his fake news project, which is a project he's been working on for about 3 years. I want to lead into it a little bit, have him talk about his background, things like that. But I specifically was interested in that project because it's so timely in this election year. As I said, Eric is based out of Rochester, New York. He is a photographer, several projects under his belt. He's been very active lately, doing a lot of exhibitions with a lot more coming up. And he teaches at the National Institute for the Deaf at Rochester Institute of Technology. So I'm going to hand it off to Eric and let him introduce himself to us.
So, as you heard, I teach at the National Technical Institute for Deaf at RIT, but I also teach for the photo school. So it keeps me a lot more interested because I get to wear multiple hats while I'm teaching. And then at night, I get to either drive down to the studio, Booksmart Studio, which is where I'm at now, and work with artist photographers or work on my own work. But yeah, I live in Rochester, New York. I've been back in Rochester, New York since 2005 with my wife and my 2 kids. And that's really, I mean, a lot of everything happens here at the studio, luckily for me. It's taken 15 years that I've been able to build this up over the years. So I'm very fortunate to have that. And as we talk a little bit more, I'll talk about, my company's name is Booksmart Studio. Came when I first started teaching at RIT because I think I was 23 at the time. So some of the other faculty were calling me Booksmart Boy. Come on. And later on, they're like, name your company Booksmart Studio or Booksmart something because, you teach workshops, you make books, you're a geek, you're an artist. So that's where the name actually comes from. So we like to have some fun too.
And you learned bookmaking at bookmaking, at University of the Arts?
I actually attended, my wife and I are in a competition for degrees is the way I joke about it. Because I went through RIT for my BFA and BS in fine art photo and biomedical photo at RIT.
Wow.
And then I got my first master's in electronic publishing. And what happened was I wound up going down to run the photo program at Mercer County Community College in New Jersey, coordinate that I wound up being there for 3 years, but that's when at the same time I worked on my MFA at University Arts part-time. And that's where I did it over 3 years. And it was much better for me being able to be spread out over those 3 years.
Tell me a little bit about your upbringing.
All right. I'm going to share some stuff to show you that.
Awesome.
All right. So I grew up in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, back when the steel was actually it was dying at the time. And I'd always been my favorite subjects in school were history and fine art. I grew up, I was a horrible student. All I did was wrestle in junior high school and high school. That area of the country, that's all we do. We had wrestling mats in all my friends' basements. So I was not the ideal student. But that's where I think junior, senior year, I got into a photography class. And I was like, I want to blend fine art, photography. I was going to go to a school for wrestling. And I wound up getting hurt again my senior year. And I said, you know what, I'm done with this. So I went to a school in northern Jersey that didn't have wrestling. It was the only reason why I chose to go there. And I realized after a year, if I stayed there, I wouldn't amount to anything in my life. So I went to Mercer County Community College for 1 year where I met Lou Draper, which I'll talk about that in a few seconds. But I grew up a roofer's son. So where I really learned to work, I say this is my father in his warehouse. It was before it was going to be taken by the bank. the first slide is there's now a casino in Bethlehem where the Bethlehem Steel was, which has really affected my family. So this was a quick series that I made going home over Thanksgiving. I just had learned that the warehouse was going to be taken away. I didn't have a tripod. I was literally using a garbage can to photograph these because this was my childhood. From fourth grade on.
The warehouse was part of Bethlehem Steel?
What's that?
The warehouse was part of Bethlehem Steel?
No, it was my grandfather had started the roofing business back in the 70s. It was my grandfather's, then my father. My brother was supposed to take it over, but it's what I grew up every summer from fourth grade on. That was my job, was working on the roof with my family. And that's when I realized that's not what I wanted to be doing.
Good plan.
My father's up there probably today on a 99-degree day, and he's 65, so I have no idea how. But that's where Bethlehem Steel really did shape my interest in photography. When I took that class, I learned about Walker Evans and all these photographers that had come to document the history of Bethlehem. And it really affected me because I said I loved history, I loved fine art, and I started to realize what photography can do as, you know, a format for arts. And I was talking about when I went to Mercer County Community College for 1 year, because I decided, you know, I really did want to focus on photography that second year of college. And I was Lou Draper's prolific. He was part of Comonji with Roy de Carava. He started it. He was the president of the group, which is basically a group of African Americans just trying to push themselves and get their work out and be accepted at the time.
Interesting.
And Lou was one of those professors. I mean, I really learned to be a human being from him, a photographer and an educator. He'd be in the dark room when it was open labs, printing right next to us. And these are some of his images that I just remember that really helped shape who I am. Here's one that's very important. I mean, this was I think in 1959 or 1960, but it's you know, it's titled A Congressional Gathering, but yet somebody's bed sheets in their backyard. So that's where, as I said, he really, really did help shape who I am. He had a mixture of, you know, Roy de Carava, W. Gene Smith, and also Henry Cartier-Bresson with the decisive moment. Everything that was in the frame needed to be there for a reason, was the one thing I always hear him when I'm photographing. So that's where, after that, Lou's the one who pushed me to go to RIT. He's like, you need to be at RIT. I was thinking about staying in the Mercer County area and going to the college in New Jersey. I met with a professor there, and he said, if you come here instead of RIT, I will have no appreciation of you. You have made the wrong mistake. And I'm like, okay, I guess I better be going to RIT. I'll show you very quickly 2 bodies of work. It's the only thing that I remember doing at RIT because I was working at the photo department. We have the cage and a printing lab. I was wrestling at RIT. I did get back into wrestling, but it was not. What's that?
You went back to wrestling.
I went back to wrestling, but it was not priority number 1. Photography actually was. So that's where I changed as a student. I was now a good student. And because I was double majoring, so I was taking 21 to 25 credits a quarter, which are 10-week mini semesters is what we used to be. But the work I remember most is what I did on my one internship was at McGuire Air Force Base. This is not on my website. I normally don't show this. This is special for you. But we were able to do things like refuel the Blue Angels in midair.
Where is it?
It's in New Jersey.
Okay.
So wing walking and photographing. If you believe that, these are all photoshopped. So when I went back to RIT, everybody was like, oh my God, you were doing that? I'm like, no, they were on the ground. And they were talking about ethics. And I was trying to explain, well, you guys are the ones that taught me to do this. Whereas this is a fisheye photo. And it was all shot with film. It was luck. As the Golden Knights are jumping out, they're gone in less than half a second. So I had no idea how to do it. So I just put the camera on motor drive as they were about to jump and didn't know until the film was processed if I had anything. The last quick body I'll show you is from the Southwest. Willie Osterman was one of Ansel Adams' print assistants and good friends with Alan Ross. We were in Alan Ross's darkroom as he was printing some of Ansel Adams' work. But this really helped shape where I was just out in the summer for 3 weeks in the Southwest just photographing with this class. I was able to create those bodies of work.
Where was that last shot was spectacular.
What's that?
The last shot, the clouds were spectacular. Where was that?
That was Lake Powell up near what was called Hype Marina. That was when there was still water there. Now there's no water because of the drought for Lake Powell. It was also, I did a lot of 4x5 infrared work at that time. It was something that I was doing way too much of. In fact, I didn't learn until halfway through the trip that all my film was being fogged with my pigskin bellows until I was able to work with Stephen Bowen in Moab, Utah's darkroom. And then I had to stop using my bag bellows. So you live and learn, right?
Yeah.
So, and the last thing I'll mention about my RIT background is something we do at RIT, which is called the Big Shot. I'm now one of the coordinators for it, but this particular still is from when we were at the Alamo. We try to get, many hundreds, if not thousands of people. We go to different locations. We've done the Alamo, Dallas Cowboy Stadium, the Intrepid in New York City, a lot of different other locations. We're now in our 33rd. It was supposed to be this year, but wound up being canceled because of COVID. But what we do is we paint with light. We light it with flashlights, flashes, have multiple people. This is something, if some people want to search, just go to RIT or just Google RIT Big Shot, and you'll see the full website of all the images we've captured. So, but that was just something I figured just show you some of what I did as a student back then. And then what happened was Lou Draper passed away. And when Lou passed away, I wound up, I was trying to get a full-time teaching job because I was only teaching part-time at RIT. And I wound up applying for the Mercer job, which was run by a different college because of politics. And it wound up being myself and my office mate at RIT who were the two finalists. And I wound up getting that position. And that was kind of the start of my overall teaching, I would say. Those were my formative years that I really think kind of really shaped who I am as a person today and photographer.
Yeah, it definitely tells a lot about you that I didn't know. So how do you characterize yourself as an artist?
Artist, I didn't realize this until the fake news actually started. But as I talked about Bethlehem, I really am more of a socioeconomic photographer who really focuses a lot on history and technology. And it took about 3 or 4 bodies of work to really start to realize that more so. When I first started teaching in 2001, let me jump to it. When I first started teaching, the second year that I was teaching, it was 9/11. It was the second day of class for freshmen. And I was like, I'm not going to teach f-stops and shutter speeds this day, that day. I was going to get gas, and I looked over and saw the newspaper rack, and I was like, you know what? We're going to talk about how photography and video and the news are going to shape our memory on that day, just as it was for Pearl Harbor. And what we wound up doing as a class was collecting 84 newspapers from around the world. And so the 15-year anniversary, 2016, I went back and interviewed the students. Because I want to see as me as an educator, if what I did that day, if it helped them or what they remember. And so what you see on the wall here is quotes from the students for what they remember from that day. Some remembered the smell of the classroom. Others remembered absolutely nothing. So that's when it really intrigued me with the idea of history. And that was 2016. That was leading up until September. So it was before the election even occurred. But my own photography, I would say, it's a lot of socioeconomic or history.
It's pretty messy. I often feel like I have way too much to do and not enough time to do it all. And I know that you're a dad, you're a husband, you run the book studio, you go out and make work, you go out and exhibit. I'm sure you have other dad responsibilities like soccer dad or whatever. How do you, there goes. How do you balance all that?
I think it really goes back to, I learned about myself when I was at RIT that I felt like I was just a normal average student until I started taking 21 to 25 credits. I learned very early on, I don't know if it's from roofing or what it is, but I need to be busy. I know a lot of people say, oh, they thrive in multitasking. But I really think that that balance of going between the multiple tasks really helps keep me level-headed and not bored. My kids really are priority number one. And the reason why I realized that is I'm the type of father that realized I had them for 18 summers or for 18 years, and then they're gone. So I try to do as much as possible. As you said, soccer dad. I'm the scout leader, son's wrestling coach, lacrosse manager, and baseball coach. And some of the other fathers ask me, our kids are 9. We have them for 9 more years before they're in college. I'm like, who are your kids going to remember doing stuff with?
Exactly.
Because I've been trying to get some of them to help out a little bit more too, because I don't want to be doing all that. Because I do have the studio and other things, and sometimes I have to have them fill in different pieces. And my daughter is my number one critic. My latest body of work, the payphone series, she can now spot a payphone before I can. We were in California I had an exhibition just north of San Francisco. We're with friends. We're going to Muir Woods. The bus pulls in. My 4-year-old daughter yells out payphone. And everybody's looking at her like they think it's a performance act. She's normally pretty good. She doesn't walk away. She gets off the bus. She gallops over the phone, picks it up, and goes, "It works. I hear something." Everybody's just staring at this kid. What really allows me to do all this also is I really do excel when I'm very busy. I was saying before about RIT and about how when I was taking a lot of credits, 21 to 25 credits, I really did find myself, meaning I found when I excel. It really does help me from getting bored or overloaded on it. Booksmart Studio, I'm able to come into this every day. This is the old studio that I had.
So jealous.
From 2005 to 2017, I was renting a space near the Eastman House and Memorial Art Gallery in Rochester, where we had 2 galleries from workshops, bookmaking area. 2017, I relocated to this space. This space has been a photo studio since the 1960s. It's zoned residential. But the best part about it, you can see there's a full kitchen. This is not what it looks like now. Now it's filled with printing and book equipment. But my kids can come in. My daughter paints on the floor. We throw the canvas down between everything. Here are my kids. They're now 9 and 5, so they don't quite look like this. I also have a serious addiction to Dr. Pepper, which is probably another reason why I can get through everything I do. And my daughter, as it was saying, she is my biggest critic for this work now. She will give me feedback. When my daughter was, 2 years old and 3 months, I normally open with this photo. My daughter would steal my wife's iPhone, convert it to black and white, and start documenting the house. So these are 3 of her photos when she was 2 years old and 3 months.
Oh, that's too cute.
That's really, like I said, it is a balancing act, but I do appreciate being able to do all the different things that I'm allowed to do here at Booksmart, and I'm also able to bring my kids in.
So my work is really personal. Even when it's a socio-economical or socio-cultural comment, it's super personal to me. And it seems like that I use my work to make sense of the world and make sense of my life and my world. I'm wondering what photography does in your work.
I think that's where you and I are very alike. So one of the first bodies of work that I really created a larger body of work. I photographed in the penitentiary in Philadelphia for 3 years. With my students at Mercer County Community College, I had no interest in photographing it. It was just another ruin. It wasn't until, and this is a body of work, this is my exhibition when I finished it in 2014, but I started this in 2003.
Exactly. Looks so.
And as you talk about that emotional attachment, this particular room has only been shown at this gallery because this was, for me, was about without having access to the original warden's logbooks from the 1820s, 1830s, and 1840s, which spoke about the prisoners. It was solitary confinement. So I learned as much as I could about the penitentiary. It was saved because it had plumbing and heat before the White House did. Logs are before photo and during the time that photography was being invented. And that's why this was very personal, just showing the emotional attachment I had to these. And that's where you couldn't even read them all the time. They're multicolored gum bichromate prints. Some of them are purposely misregistered. Some are actually inverted for some of the colors. This was a body of work that I got out of it. All this is available on my website if anybody's interested. That idea of where does that personal attachment come into it? And this is, as you're talking about our lives. Well, this is a series I started doing because in 2008, my business went into serious debt and I couldn't do anything about it. Paperwork was filed incorrectly. So we had to work out of it. I'm not ashamed. I tell my students all the time, we were literally $343,000 in debt because of selling the supplies. We were selling, and then everything just dropped out, and I had a lot of money too. And we had to work it out. It took 4 years, and that's when I realized in 2012, when I finally got most of it paid, that I wanted to go back because we now had kids, and I was ready. I felt like I was ready. I took from 2005 to 2012 off from teaching, and this is a play on the economy in upstate New York. And it's not just upstate New York anymore. It's expanded to the United States. But my play on what I was seeing and feeling from going into debt and having New York State really do what they did to me at the time. Another body of work, before we get into the fake news, is when I moved my studio. Teaching at RIT, many of my friends, colleagues, were calling the area that I moved because I left Neighbor of the Arts, where my studio was broken into 3 times in 9 months. I moved it up near the baseball stadium and the soccer stadium, but everybody deems it a war zone. Yes, their socioeconomic situation's horrible. The average income in this area is less than $20,000 a year. Doesn't mean they're not working. Doesn't mean that they're not working 2-3 jobs. They're working minimum wage jobs. This is a larger body, which is a separate discussion. I'll just show it briefly, but it's titled Falsific Calculus because the phone company left them. There's still 1,455 payphones in Rochester. Why? Our economics of Kodak, Xerox, Bausch and Lomb dying, nothing's replaced the blue collar. But I'm really trying to show the socioeconomic status of working with the mapping of the payphones and then the census information, showing that the homes around here typically sell for $25,000. But I actually feel safer here because my place has not been broken into, knock on wood, since I moved it out of the location near the Eastman Museum. Really trying to make sure people are aware of our poverty line and how these are still a lifeline for people. So before COVID hit, I was supposed to start doing phone recordings of those that are relying on the payphones or voice recordings. I'm going to put it back on the payphone so you can pick it up and hear their story, not mine.
That
as well.
So cool to be able to go into a gallery show and pick up a payphone in this day and age and listen to it and have it directly tied to the photos. That is so cool, but I imagine it's a little bit problematic trying to collect and store these things.
Well, that's where, luckily, my wife says the payphones do not go home. They have to stay here. The Frontier just claimed bankruptcy in the middle of COVID. So now the question is, what's going to happen to the payphones? And that's where there's a not-for-profit out of Portland, Oregon that's installing free payphones. They're also breaking down some of that class and race barrier by when you actually go to pick up the phone, you can also learn about the history of that area. And I would really like to try to work with them quite a bit more on this, bringing it to Rochester. Also, if we de-install them, maybe we can have more phone boxes to put in other cities because we don't need all 1,450 this up until now. Even recording the individuals that rely on the payphone. But now I've decided I'm still going to do the placard, but instead record it over the phone and then drive them, because what I'm going to do is pay them with a calling card to verify. I can't just give them cash. Otherwise, journalistically, is it accurate? But instead, if they are truly relying on the payphones, if I give them a $10 calling card, now they can utilize that and use it on the phones. Another thing is when I travel now, I'm not a payphone photographer. Yes, I'm photographing when I was at Point Reyes National Seashore. Payphone was there, it worked. Because when Magnum was in Rochester a few years ago, a story was run in the New York Times, the Crescent City, which made Rochester look like the worst place in the world. So I'm trying to show that, hey, look, Rochester is not the only place that's still relying on it.
What's your overarching vision for your work?
I'm still trying to figure that out in many ways, I guess you could say. But I mean, it really is about trying to get people to think again about different socioeconomic or historical issues. The payphone is about, really making sure people don't forget those that technology has left behind. But I mean, that's really, I would say, overarching.
What makes you look at an image and say, I'm ready? Nope, the image is ready for me to show it to the world?
It's there's a lot of my images that never make the website, even still for like the Payphone project or the others, until I see them in print. I will show things even in a lot of it. I will re-photograph the print oftentimes. So a lot of my Payphone, that's where you might see the lighting change a little bit, and that's where there's a different color cast in it. Because then I also know how it's tagged. It's not going to be the same image. It's not going to have the same quality or resolution if I photograph the print. It sounds a little bit odd, but for me, it's a way of tracking, because I've had images show up on Russian websites before. And so that's why I make sure, Instagram, all these other things are as small as possible. It's, sometimes you can really see the paper texture, which is fine. And that's how I can differentiate it. And they don't even bother to change the different color cast. Owning the print studio, I'm really a print snob.
I am totally with you on that. Grad school, and undergrad, I worked as a print research associate. I totally love printing, and that's why I'm so jealous of your studio. But so when you're talking about, I'm a print snob, I'm like, yes, I am so with you on that.
Yeah, and that really goes back to Lou Draper, who we talked about before, who I studied with. He was one of W. Gene's print assistants, and he had studied with him also. And that's where watching Lou in the darkroom, and he would talk about, his hands were always in the chemistry, even with potassium ferrocyanide. That's why he probably died way too young of cancer, because he was always about, until you feel the print. Well, I'm not that far. I mean, obviously with digital now. But yeah, I think he really helped ingrain that at an early age, as well as Willie Osterman, who, taught me the zone system with film and then printing. So that's where I've just carried that over to digital. I haven't printed in a darkroom since 1999. I used to have 3 Iris printers here at the studio before we moved over to Epson. So I've been very, very lucky. Tell
us about fake news.
When the election was about to happen in 2016, we really we didn't talk politics in our household at the time. So my son, who's about 9 now, would have been, 6 at the time. And he was in 1st grade. And so one day we're sitting there talking about his school was going to have a mock camp election. And we said, okay. And there was a newsletter that was sent out that here, my son had talked about it. The kids on the playground were no longer playing. They were having debates about Hillary versus Trump. Okay, who are you going to vote for? And my son said Trump, because Hillary's going to make China great again. And we said, where did you hear this? And he said, on TV. And here it was during one of the NFL football games. There was one of the commercials, which was a Trump-supported commercial, which was talking about how Hillary was going, because it came on a few days later, how Hillary was going to make China great again. And it hit home that we needed to actually talk to our son about politics. We needed to talk about both sides so then he could decide. And Hillary won the election, by the way, at his elementary school, just letting you know. But for me, it was that night that I started recording as the numbers started coming in. I had a feeling that Trump was going to win. I figured, all right, I need to do something about this. I wanted to record for my kids kind of the history as to what was going to happen because of the claims of fake news. I didn't intend this to be a project by any means. In fact, up until the inauguration, I didn't take another screenshot. This was the day after the election, what I had captured. I started it by only capturing CNN because during the campaign, CNN was beat up left and right. So I want to record what CNN was showing at that time. And I think the next time I did that was on Inauguration Day, because I was really hopeful that he was going to surround himself with people. That was my hope. And then what I quickly realized after the inauguration and the whole camp, my crowd size was bigger, was I needed to keep on recording this. And after a while, what I realized that I needed to do was record CNN, ABC News, New York Times, Fox News, and the Washington Post. It's grown to also include the Huffington Post. So here, this is actually the first one that I recorded the day after the election. So with this, again, it was really trying to make sure for my kids they could look back on history, just like how we kind of had collected the 9/11 newspapers. This is where I started recording CNN, ABC, New York Times, Fox News. This didn't have Washington Post at the time. And it started out where it'd be once a day. Then it grew to multiple times a day. And only if I saw the news headline actually change. And what I'm really trying to do is show just the headlines. I have recorded many of the stories, but for copyright reasons, but also because that way all we're getting is the headlines. And it really makes you start to think back to what were the events, because we're not getting the full story. And that's really a big part to this overall body. And then eventually it's taken over my life. On your iPhone where you have your favorite people and places, your albums, I'm going to show you real quick a video of this is my favorite in my albums. These are my people. So right now, Trump's number 1. Kim Jong-un is number 4. My son, my daughter, my wife, my father-in-law. But this is just me scrolling through. So you can see it's all of the political individuals over the past 4 years are now my people on my iPhone.
So funny.
Yeah, it's funny that it makes you cry at the same time. I started to realize that, you know what? No, we need to put this out. I wanted to get it out as an archive. So there's 2 different ways I'm doing that. One is it was supposed to be 3 volumes of books, which was red, white, and blue for 3 volumes. And then COVID hit. And so what I realized with COVID, I'm sometimes capturing 5 to 6 times a day. It's gone insane. And it's actually, I would honestly say, affected me emotionally in many ways because I can't escape the news.
Yeah.
I think I have to give my phone away or put it in a safe somewhere for 2 weeks after the next election to end this project. No matter what happens, I'm done. But this is actually volume 4 now, which is going to be from March 2nd up until the next election.
You don't want to document the revolution that happens when Trump loses?
And I might have to go up to the inauguration, depending on what does happen, to record history. I'm really hoping I don't need to.
Huh.
But the idea for these is I want these to be in archives at institutions. It's not about making money off of this book. This book, because it's 12, actually here, I made sure, let me stop sharing real quick. So it's 12 by 18. You see how thick it is. This is volume 2. Volume 1 is about 40 pages more. Volume 3, same. Volume 4 for the pandemic is probably going to be, I don't even know. To give you an idea of the weight, these are about 18 pounds or so. But as you flip through it, it is day after day of fake news. And I would really like to get this into archives of different universities or research locations so we can look back on this in history. And for those that can't afford it, on www.fakenewsarchiveproject.com, I have every page up there because I want everybody to have access to this. This is a project I've been working on. I don't feel that it belongs to me. I think it belongs to everybody. And that's why I really want to make sure that it's free and accessible. And those that want it in the archive, I'm truly only selling it for $30 over cost. And another reason why I haven't mass produced them is I was worried about getting a cease and desist letter. I get hate mail, I get fake cease and desist letters, but those are some of the things that have happened with this particular project. But it's really about recording this and then getting it back out.
Any cease and desist from any of the media companies or any of the politicians?
No, the only ones that I actually received it from, and that's where it was a fake one because I was really scared at first, and I showed it to some other individuals. And when you Google it, it was basically it was a canned one that you could find online with Googled, and the firm that it said it was from wasn't even in existence. I'm with this project by showing all 5 and only doing the headlines. Really trying to make sure I'm not putting it out there because being a photographer, I worry about copyright also, but it's really about recording the history. And that's where it's on the iPhone, so that way it's photographed there, so it's more of an object at the same time. But really, again, having all 5, even Huffington Post for the 6th one at times, it's all about an archive for them. And that's where I have
photographing the phones.
I started out doing it that way, and now what I do is I take a screen capture and put it back on there. But that way people realize it hasn't been edited from here. I'm not changing anything. You'll see sometimes there'll be little pop-ups of ads. Again, I don't want to remove that because that was part of what was going on that day. And that's really the fake news project overall. Again, it's about getting it out there.
And who do you hope it to influence, and in what way?
On my in-law side, the men are very, very staunch Republicans. My father-in-law only watches Fox News. That's it. My kids have to beg him to watch any other TV when he comes to our house. And I accidentally left volume 1 and 2 out when he came up for Christmas Eve this year. And he picked it up, and I broke out in sweats. I'm like, oh my God, he's looking at it. I didn't intend for him to see it. And he opened it up, and he's going through. He goes, this is incredible. I'm like, okay. He goes, you need to bring this to Christmas tomorrow, to the family gathering. So I brought it. I brought volume 1 and 2 out. And we don't talk politics in the family. We really don't, because it's always, they joke around about Fox News being the only right one. But what happened was I learned that day that my sister-in-laws are not Republican. They are Democratic. But again, we never talk about this stuff, and I had no idea. And at first what happened was people looked at it and they made the joke, oh, look, Fox News is right. Oh, no, it's not. But then after about 5 minutes of that, people started saying, look at this event. I forgot about this event. I forgot about this. I forgot about this. And it became about the events. The whole idea of fake news was gone. So for me, that's when I knew that this project actually had legs to get a discussion going between Republicans and Democrats and everybody in the middle. But once that dialogue occurred within the family, and for the first time people actually did talk about politics and it was civil, and I think that was the grandest experiment I could have. For me, really, it's about getting it out to everybody. And the reason why I say everybody is because if within that family, we can look at the events, why won't that happen at other locations? But at the same time, wherever you believe, left or right, there's cloak and dagger shows going on all the time right now. Every day it's something new. We never get to whatever the situation was for any of the events. And overall, what I'm hoping to do is before the election, I did the event at Cultivate 712 in Waco, Texas, A. Smith Gallery in Johnson City, Texas, where we basically had what was called fake news, unglued, rebroadcast news, which those were the 2 beta sites. I figure if I'm in Texas and this can work, again, why not try the hardest place it could possibly be? And it was a very successful event. So this was the time lapse. So what happened was I showed up at the gallery. I had full pages, and Kevin and Amanda, who are awesome, had cut up individual cell phones. So people were either able to take a full page or just the iPhone by itself. We had blue tape there, we had pins there, we had Sharpies, because I learned from the Cultivate 712 event that people wanted to interact with it more. And this was about 2 or 3 days later, I forget how many days. But here's the time lapse of what happened. So first, I gave an overall discussion, talking about where the project came from and the idea about my son's school. And then we just had a dialogue that lasted probably for about 20, 25 minutes, but it was just unplanned. Then it was up to the participants to just curate the work, hang the work. People were writing things with Sharpie. You'll see some writing there, crossing certain things out. And the event was supposed to be up for weeks and allowing gallery participants just to come in and add to it. Well, we all know COVID hit because this was around March, what do I want to say, 10th? Forgive me, Amanda and Kevin, for forgetting the exact date. But we actually held this event there. And you can see this is pretty much how it looked at the end. People were taking it and fanning the individual's phones. You can see in the bottom right on the edge, and pinned it in as if it was a flower. So people's emotions were pretty raw that night. And again, the discussions that were occurring were just incredible. I learned a lot from people there that night of
Really?
just different scenarios.
Oh,
It was,
right.
another one was Gregory. He runs in the. He did a book that was called Flowers for Trump, which was also fashion off. He found out later on there was also one for Flowers for Hitler. He found that out many, many months later. But he has that body of work. So I want to also bring in different elements if possible and just collaborate with other artists, but different organizations to find ways to get this back in front of people, no matter what their community is, because this is one way we can maybe get people talking again before the election, because right now we're so polar opposite.
Yeah.
And there are no discussions. That's the worst part. But you can't ignore the overall events of this. We can, if you're a Republican, you can try to ignore CNN. But if you see Fox News reporting the same thing, for instance, when Notre Dame Cathedral was burning, everybody's kind of talking about the same thing except one news channel. You'll have to look at it in the book. I'm not going to say which one, but the idea is looking at what's being covered. Instead of covering Notre Dame burning, you're attacking a candidate. It's not even, it was March or whatever. I'm blanking on what time of the year. I think it was March that Notre Dame burned. Forgive me. Too much news lately in my brain. So, but that's a long story as to what it's about. There's many, many different avenues, but I'm really trying to look for anybody that's willing to participate, anybody that has an idea for getting this stuff to people. I'm open for any help, any suggestions, because this project has kind of really become overwhelming.
So how do people get in touch with you about that?
They could either go to the www.fakenewsarchiveproject.com, and my email's right there, as well as a contact form submission in case they want to say what they're thinking about or how, if they just want to participate, if there's something in their region. I'm trying to also on the website, in the blog, anybody that's going to hold one of these events, I want to give them the opportunity to put their event up on the blog. So we can also come back to the website and see what happened during that month of October.
Yeah, very cool.
Give them admin access to that. But also if you're planning to do something, advertise your locations on the website also. So it can be one big community area. And also they can also email me at eric@erickunsman.com as well. So.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing this in more iterations than I had seen previously by, seeing the gallery shots or whatever. It was really interesting to see the time lapse there.
Yeah, and that's where I did forget to mention also, the other part is I'm hoping that if somebody is at, let's say, one of the universities, and they would really like to get it into the archive, you can buy it and donate it for those archives. And that's the other piece to where we can ship it right to them. That's part of what's on the website, is if you want to buy all 4 volumes and have it shipped to an archive, as long as they're willing to accept it and you have that prearranged. So there are different elements to it also, because to me, this needs to live on. So we learn from this history, because no matter what you believe, media is shifting.
Yeah. So what's next after this? November rolls around and this is POW. What's next?
I'm going into rehab for 2 weeks. So I stopped recording the fake news whenever it all dies down. But no, honestly, for me, luckily, my payphone project, I actually have a due date of trying to finish that project for April of 2021, because it is going to be at SEPA. And I really want to try to have all 1,455 payphones photographed if I have the chance to. The interview's done. I was lucky enough to receive a Warhol Foundations grant for that project to help subsidize part of it. But that's when I would really like to do that. And I also have about 6 solo exhibitions coming up, as you mentioned earlier. So luckily I have enough other things happening. It's just more or less continuing my private Go Back series, my payphone series, and hopefully be done with this fake news series.
Yeah,
But as I said,
for a while.
No matter what, I'm done. No matter what happens, I can't continue this. And I've made that decision. Might go up to inauguration. We'll see. I don't know. So.
All right. Is there anything you want to talk about that I haven't asked you about?
No, that's where I guess one of the biggest things is if there are other artists that are listening to this that have done work with the socio-political environment that we're going through, there are a lot of exhibitions coming up. But if you have ideas that you think might help with this Fake News Unglued event, as I said, I'm looking for collaborators, looking for ways to just get this out to people. And that's another thing also, even with my payphone series, there's photographers now in LA, Portland, who are now doing their series in their cities. So one thing is, if you're watching this and you're somebody that's been working on different socioeconomic issues and want to collaborate, that's another big part of what I love to do. We learn so much more from each other. As you know, when we've had discussions outside of this Zoom, without it being community, we don't learn nearly as much. And that's where I'm always looking to collaborate. So,
great. All right, then. Thank you so much. You were so generous with your time and your knowledge, and just so adorable on camera.
It's the smile.